On the last and final day of the government's return to work deadline for doctors opposed to medical reform, some are heading back to hospitals. The government is holding talks with trainees today as it signals medical license suspension or indictment after the deadline passes. President Yoon met visiting Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg at his office for discussions on artificial intelligence cooperation. This comes on the heels of the Meta founder having met the leaders of Korean tech giants the previous day. With AI front and center at this year's Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, we take a closer look at not only what's new but what to take away from South Korean tech powers at the show. It's February 29th, 2024. This is Newscenter. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon. On this last day, as announced by the government for the trainee doctors who've resigned in protest to come back to their posts, some are making returns. The Health Ministry today held talks with trainees as it also prepares to proceed with judicial procedures for those who aren't coming back, possibly involving license suspensions. Lee Si-hoo starts us off.
Thursday marks the last day for the resident doctors in the country who've left their posts in hospitals in protest of the medical school enrollment quota increase to return to duty without bearing legal liabilities. Beginning in March, the government will begin administrative and judicial procedures for those who don't. Second Vice Health Minister Bang Min-soo has previously warned that the ministry will, quote, follow the laws and principles according to the current Medical Service Act to penalize medical professionals not complying with the government's order to return to work. He said measures such as medical license suspensions of at least 3 months or official indictments are inevitable. Currently, the ministry's inspection teams are checking the status of doctors' absences at hospitals. Once confirmed, the ministry will notify individual doctors of their failure to follow the duties outlined by the law and the corresponding legal consequences. During the process, doctors will have a chance to defend themselves through statements of opinion. Following days of government return-to-work orders, some trainee doctors have returned to their posts. According to the Health Ministry's announcement Thursday, as of the day before, a total of 294 doctors at 100 hospitals have returned since resigning. At one hospital, 66 doctors have gone back. Meanwhile, the Health Ministry sent out invitations to doctors via text message on Wednesday for a closed-door meeting in Seoul. Second Vice Minister Bang Min-soo suggested Thursday afternoon for a candid discussion. As of Wednesday evening, a total of 9,997, or around 80% of resident doctors in the 100 major hospitals in the country, have submitted and maintained their will to resign. Of them, 9,076 have left their posts. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
President Yoon today met with Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg at his office and discussed future tech cooperation in areas including AI and semiconductors. The president says South Korea is the right place for digital collaboration. Our correspondent Oh Soo-young reports.
South Korea is ready to back collaborations between Samsung, Meta and other big tech firms to foster a global ecosystem of cutting-edge digital technologies. This came as President Yoon on Thursday met with Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg, who's on a 3-day trip to Seoul. Yoon's policy director Song Tae-yeon announced that the meeting took place at the presidential office for around half an hour, with the discussion centered on ways that South Korea and Meta could collaborate amid the heated global race for supremacy in artificial intelligence. With AI powering future technologies like smart devices and self-driving cars, and crucial systems and infrastructure like data centers and the Internet of Things, the president noted that IT firms are seeking high-speed AI chips for smarter and faster processing. Emphasizing that South Korea has the world's top 2 memory chip makers, Samsung and SK Hynix, Yoon encouraged Zuckerberg to cooperate closely with local companies.
As much as there's now a close-knit supply chain cooperation system between the South Korean and U.S. governments, President Yoon said he would actively support cooperation between businesses at a government level.
Tech mogul Zuckerberg reportedly noted that Samsung occupies a pivotal position in the global foundries market, a key point of consideration in cooperating with the chip firm. He alluded to the world's heavy dependence on Taiwanese firm TSMC for non-memory chips amid highly volatile circumstances surrounding the island. Prior to their meeting, Zuckerberg met with the chiefs of Samsung and LG Electronics. According to Song, President Yoon said there could be further synergy with South Korea's hardware serving as excellent platforms for Meta's AI. Given the country's diverse portfolio of smart home appliances, wearable devices and smart cars, recognized for their high technology and quality. Particularly on Zuckerberg's vision to create an open metaverse ecosystem, Yoon said South Korea continues to support such future industries and hopes to cooperate with Meta on joint research and development and fostering talent.
The president said that Korean companies can play an important role and emphasized that big tech and various governments should work together to create a digital ecosystem.
Yoon and Zuckerberg also discussed Meta's role in countering the spread of disinformation and propaganda on social media, with the South Korean leader expressing concern about the manipulation of AI and its threat to democracy, particularly ahead of the April general election. Yoon has been meeting with prominent leaders in the digital sector, including those of Apple, Tesla, Netflix and OpenAI, to seek opportunities for greater business and investment in the country. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
With the general election some 40 days away, the country's ruling and opposition parties reached an agreement today on finalizing electoral districts after a long discussion. Our correspondent Shin Ha-young is on the line at the National Assembly where a parliamentary plenary session is taking place. Ha-young, what's on the map?
Well, Jung-min, we're still waiting for the vote on the electoral district proposal to be addressed at the National Assembly's plenary session. And this comes after last-minute negotiation on the electoral districts between the ruling and opposition parties. The Election Act requires the National Assembly to finalize the electoral districts a year before the election. However, this had not been done with just 40 days to go before the election due to clashes of opinion between the parties. And in an agreement between the ruling and opposition parties' floor leaders, the two decided to reduce proportional representation seats by 1 and to retain the current 10 seats for Jeollabuk-do province. And originally, the plan was to take 1 seat each of Seoul and Jeollabuk-do province and add 1 seat each for Incheon and Gyeonggi-do province. However, ultimately, only Seoul, Incheon, and Gyeonggi-do province will have the changes made. And as a result, the number of seats for elected lawmakers has increased to 254 from 253, as 1 seat was taken from the proportional representation bloc, which dropped its number to 46 from 47, keeping the total number of lawmakers at the National Assembly at 300.
Well, Ha-young, I heard that certain regions have been permitted to undergo partial divisions.
You're right, Jung-min. The preliminary agreement made in the National Assembly Special Committee on Political Reform to designate Seoul, Gangwon-do, Gyeonggi-do, and Jeollanam-do provinces as special zones has remained unchanged. And this decision allows for the partial splitting up of certain districts, cities, or counties, considering their administrative boundaries and geographical conditions, with the aim of reflecting the regional representation of rural areas. And meanwhile, the Democratic Party's request to adjust electoral districts in Busan was left out of the final agreement. And that's all I have for this hour. Back to you, Jung-min.
Thanks, Ha-young, for the coverage. Over in Washington, Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yeol has met his American counterpart, Antony Blinken, to highlight the need to better respond to growing threats by North Korea, especially in light of the upcoming parliamentary election here and the presidential election in the U.S. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Bae Eun-ji has more.
South Korea's Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yeol met with his American counterpart Antony Blinken in Washington on Wednesday local time and discussed ways to cooperate in order to better respond to evolving North Korean threats. The hour-long meeting was their first bilateral sit-down since Cho took office last month. This comes amid concerns about North Korea's military cooperation with Russia and speculations that the regime could engage in more provocations ahead of parliamentary elections in South Korea in April and the U.S. presidential election in November.
We are one in condemning North Korea's increasingly provocative rhetoric and actions that violate multiple UN Security Council resolutions, including its export of munitions and ballistic missiles to Russia.
While noting that South Korea and the U.S. have always moved in lockstep, Cho highlighted that strengthening their trilateral coordination with Japan is essential for addressing common security challenges and promoting stability in the Indo-Pacific region. On global issues, he added that South Korea continues to stand together in supporting Ukraine and that it's also united in condemning Houthi attacks. Blinken, who will be visiting Seoul next month, said he's very much looking forward to being in South Korea and said the two countries' partnership is stronger than it's ever been.
We're working together on virtually every major challenge that we have to contend with around the world, as well as working together to build even greater opportunities for our people here in the United States and in South Korea.
Seoul's foreign ministry said the two sides also agreed to strengthen diplomatic efforts to cut off the sources of North Korea's illicit funding activities and revive interest in North Korean defectors, detainees, and prisoners of war. Peunji, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, preparations are reportedly underway by a number of European countries looking to reopen their diplomatic missions in North Korea following pandemic-related closures back in 2020. Lee Seung-jae has details.
In January 2020, North Korea began closing up its border in a bid to prevent the COVID-19 virus from spreading in its own country. Having one of the world's strictest border controls at the time, all European nations withdrew from their embassies in Pyongyang. However, 4 years on from their departure, a number of European embassies in the North Korean capital will reopen in the near future. According to a Reuters report on Wednesday, Britain's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office is discussing plans with the North Korean embassy in London for a technical and diplomatic delegation to visit Pyongyang. A spokesperson from the Foreign Office said it welcomes the return of some diplomats to Pyongyang and North Korea's move to reopen its borders, adding that it asked North Korea to allow entry for the international community, including all diplomats, UN agencies, and non-governmental humanitarian organizations. Sweden's special envoy for the Korean Peninsula, Peter Samneby, said there had been some progress regarding his return to Pyongyang. The return of North Korean diplomats to their overseas posts has also been a slow and gradual process. Last August, the regime cautiously began sending their ambassadors to pro-North Korean countries such as China, Russia, Mongolia, and Cuba. Other European nations are beginning the process of returning diplomats to Pyongyang, as the German Foreign Ministry said that it will begin inspecting their embassy, which had been left vacant for years before its ambassador returns. The Swiss Foreign Ministry is also discussing a visit to North Korea to resume humanitarian projects by the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. Switzerland has been conducting support projects for North Korea with the Development Cooperation Office in Pyongyang since 1997, which it withdrew from in March 2020. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is traveling beyond borders to seek support for Ukraine's defense against Russian aggression. This time, he visited the Balkans for the first time since the war broke out. Our Yoon covers his latest calls for solidarity.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has been traveling around the world to drum up support for Ukraine to improve defensive capabilities against Russia at a time of faltering military support from Western allies. Zelenskyy was in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday to push for a peace plan and the return of prisoners of war from Russia, which was followed by a two-day summit of 11 countries from southeastern Europe, along with officials from the European Union and other international organizations. Speaking at the Ukraine Southeast Europe Summit held in Albania on Wednesday, Zelenskyy said the low ammunition supply is affecting the situation on the battlefield and called on leaders of Balkan countries for help. He also proposed holding a Ukraine-Balkan Defense Forum to strengthen arms cooperation. Albania was among the first countries to offer shelter to Ukrainian refugees and continues to voice full support for Ukraine. It has provided military assistance in the form of ammunition and training for the Ukrainian military. But Ukraine did not receive full support for its war against Russia at the meeting. Kremlin ally Serbia has refused to align with EU sanctions following Russia's invasion and continues to sign cooperation agreements with Moscow. Meanwhile, at the European Parliament in Strasbourg on Wednesday, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen proposed that the European Union consider using profits from frozen Russian assets to buy military supplies for Ukraine. She urged the EU to do more on defense policy, adding that the threat of war for the EU may not be imminent, but it is not impossible.
It is time to start a conversation about using the windfall profits of frozen Russian assets to jointly purchase military equipment for Ukraine. There could be no stronger symbol and no greater use for that money than to make Ukraine and all of Europe a safer place to live.
Billions of euros worth of Russian assets are being held in Europe. Belgium has estimated the figure to be around $195 billion worth, and Prime Minister Alexander De Croo has said that he wants to use all the interest on those funds for Ukraine's reconstruction. 이은진, Arirang News.
South Korea has set its largest on-record funding for official development assistance this year. The amount tops 6.2 trillion Korean won, or about $4.7 billion US. Prime Minister Han Duck-soo presided over a related committee meeting on Thursday to review and finalize this year's plan. He said the largest ODA funding set aside this year is to fulfill the role and responsibilities of a global pivotal state, a visionary concept of the country articulated by the Yoon government. ODA targets the economic development and welfare of developing countries. Billboard has unveiled its first Billboard K-Pop Artist 100 list based on their success on the main charts throughout 2023. Jungkook of BTS secured the top spot for his outstanding achievement, notably his solo debut single, 7. The list was unveiled on Tuesday local time to commemorate the upcoming launch of Billboard Korea at an event in Seoul, featuring many of the listed artists in May. Billboard will select 100 K-pop solo artists or groups each year based on their placings on the Billboard 200 albums chart, Hot 100 chart, and box score data, which reflects tour records. Curtains went up this week in Barcelona for this year's Mobile World Congress. This means eyes are on the latest technological advancements in the mobile tech and telecommunications. South Korean tech powers are no exception among thousands of global firms. Our business correspondent Moon Hae-ryun joins me in the studio. Welcome, Hae-ryun.
Happy Leap Day, Jungmin.
Happy Leap Day. So, Hae-ryun, what was the central theme of the MWC this year?
So the overarching theme for the MWC this year was Future First. This embodied 6 different sub-themes such as 5G and AI, and extends beyond the mobile industry to digital transformation overall. Last year's theme was also centered around AI, but here's what was said about the difference between 2023 and this year.
Applications around 5G, AI, and platforms, and how these 3 things can work together to provide a service or a solution to you as a consumer or to you as a businesses that is different from what it was before.
So this year, it was all about how different technologies, products, and services can work together for future digital innovation. As a result, it's no surprise that we saw a lot of AI-related services and products this year. Google CEO announced the relaunch of its AI image generation tool Gemini, and several mobile companies showcased their smartphones with integrated AI technology. But as this year's event takes technology further than just mobiles, another product integrating AI that caught people's eyes despite being transparent was Lenovo's new laptop. The see-through screen with a camera attached enables users to view an object behind the computer and find out information about it using built-in artificial intelligence that analyzes the image.
Oh, wow. And what did South Korean firms bring to MWC?
So this year's turnout from South Korea was its largest yet, with many startups and SMEs participating. The Korea Trade Investment Promotion Agency opened a joint booth with the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy for small domestic startups, SMEs and related organizations.
8 public institutions joined forces with the government to support Korean companies as one, so 118 startups and SMEs are promoting at MWC under the same brand, Korea.
AI was a running theme for many Korean firms at the joint booth, and domestic startup Hyodol, offering AI companionship for the elderly, was awarded the 2024 Global Mobile Awards in the Best Mobile Innovation for Connected Health and Well-being category. South Korea's biggest tech firms also brought their A-game, with Samsung Electronics unveiling its latest line of wearable tech, the Galaxy Ring, which tracks health data in your sleep. It's yet to hit the shelves, but the firm displayed the Galaxy Ring in 3 different colors and 9 different sizes at the event. Telecommunications companies KT and SK Telecom set up AI-related booths this year and demonstrated a wide range of services. KT showed its intelligent urban air mobility traffic management system that assists in the safe operation of urban air mobility vehicles. UATM digitally replicates real-world UAM operations by integrating digital twin technology and AI that enhances safety based on numerous data analyses and simulations. As for SK Telecom, it showcased its telco-specific large language model that's used in various services, such as its virtual chatbot assistant.
And Hye-yeon, there are so many global firms gathering this year. Were there any interactions between them?
Right, Changmin. Well, the MWC brands itself as an event where companies, technology and commerce converge. And this year, firms and governments alike did exactly that. SK Telecom is collaborating with 4 other global telecommunications firms from Germany, Saudi Arabia, Singapore and Japan to develop a joint LLM and other AI-related services. South Korea is also one of 10 countries, alongside the United States, Australia and Japan, that signed a joint statement outlining principles for the research and development of 6th-generation wireless communication systems. It includes the promotion of national security protection capabilities with safe and resilient technology, as well as building on global standards that promote sustainability, interoperability, openness and security. It also emphasized the need for a safe and resilient supply chain and promoting global market competition.
All right, lots on the plate. Thanks for the wrap-up, Hye-yeon.
Thank you for having me.
Rain and snow continue throughout the southern areas of the Chungcheongdo provinces today, but there was no major cold in Seoul with only cloudy skies. However, cold winds will gradually begin to strengthen, changing the air rapidly tomorrow. The temperature in Seoul is expected to drop to -6 degrees Celsius and the wind chill to -12 tomorrow morning. If you're planning to go out for a long weekend, you should dress warmly. There will be another cold snap across the country. Temperatures will plummet to around -10 degrees in the mountainous areas of Gangwon-do province, where a cold wave warning has been issued. It's forecast to rain or snow in the coastal areas of the Jeollado provinces and on Jeju Island from the afternoon tomorrow. A freezing morning is expected tomorrow. Seoul and Chuncheon -6, Daejeon -4 degrees Celsius. It will be below 0 in the middle of the day tomorrow in center areas. Seoul -2, Daegu and Gyeongju 4 degrees Celsius. The cold snap is expected to last for 2 days and gradually ease from the day after tomorrow. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session coming up.
엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 웰컴. 24시간 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
Hello everyone, welcome to Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. Who's heard of Korea discount? This decades-long phenomenon has hunted the local capital market for a long time. It refers to the tendency of South Korean listed companies to be undervalued compared to others in the global market. The main reasons behind this are known to be weak corporate governance and insufficient shareholder returns. The government is showing a strong willingness to elevate the Korean stock market's price-to-book value ratio, coming up with a program called the Corporate Value Up. Known to have benchmarked Japan, some expect such initiatives to effectively boost the company's value, while others say they are rather disappointing. What exactly is this Korea discount, and how did experts see the government's guidelines? For this, we invited Professor Yang Jun-seok from the Catholic University of Korea. Professor Yang, welcome.
Be happy to be here.
And we also have Professor Hwa-Kyun Kim from Mays Business School of Texas A&M University. Good to have you with us, Professor Kim.
Pleasure to be here.
All right, Professor Yang, we first need to talk about what the Korea discount is and if it really has been haunting the local capital market for decades. Now, what is it, and have firms on the Korean stock market really been undervalued compared to other countries?
Okay, well, we have been, as you said, discussing this for decades, and the way that you usually calculate it is try to measure how the average stock prices for Korean market differ from other countries. And one study by a national research institute looking at data between 2012 and 2021 calculated that Korea's stock prices on the average are about 52% below where it should be compared to advanced country markets, taking into account what the basic management variables like growth and capitals ratios were, and it was about 58% behind emerging market stock prices. Other studies looking at comparing Morgan Stanley's Capital International indices calculate that Korean stocks are about 36% lower than advanced country stock markets and about 16% below emerging market stock prices. Now, which companies are most affected? Well, that's not very clear because a lot of this is sort of a statistical guesswork. But most studies do seem to indicate that major Korean companies, almost all major Korean companies like Samsung companies, LG companies, Hyundai Motors, they all seem to be affected, some to a greater extent, some to a lesser extent, but all seem to be affected by this lower valuation of the stock compared to their book value or their profitability.
Right, so it seems Korea discount does really exist, and I guess it is in line with how Korea's stock market price to book value ratio stayed at 1.05 last year. Now, Professor Kim, experts say there are mainly two reasons behind such undervaluation. First is weak corporate governance. Could you tell us more about this?
Sure. First of all, according to many studies, mostly studying the U.S. market, the corporate governance may affect or indeed affects the future stock returns, but then there are also a lot of studies showing that it's not. So I think, the results itself is a bit controversial. So having said that, what's the possible, the theories or the mechanism of the weak corporate governance affecting the stock market in case of South Korea? So one is definitely the shareholder activism is not enough in that, relatively, the limited shareholder activism exists in South Korea. So minority shareholders, or both the domestic and foreigners, they don't actually have enough rights to influence the corporate decisions. And therefore, the management held accountable is something difficult. And also the board composition may be somewhat different from the other countries more advanced, the stock markets. So maybe it is true that there must be some compromise of this board ability to affect the effective oversight of the management, and also the regulation wise it may be somewhat too strict, so that the governance actually is going to be somewhat swayed by the government policies as well as the larger stakeholders, such as the owners of the conglomerates. And lastly, I think somewhat related to the transparency of like this disclosure. And I think many of the Korean firms tend to hide some of the information until it is really just imminent or bad. So that may be something related to it. But again, I think we don't know exactly if this is affecting the Korea discount.
All right, I see. Well, we are going to talk about excessive regulation, but I hear another reason is actually insufficient levels of shareholder return. Now, Professor Yang, is this in any way closely related to what our Professor Kim already told us?
Somewhat. I think Korea does not really care too much about stockholders because, well, the Korean tradition, I hesitate to call it culture, but Korean corporate culture seems to be that, well, legally, stockholders are the owners of the company, and that's how the law understands it. But in reality and effectively, the founders and their families seems to be the owner of the company. That's reflected in Korea's fair trade laws, where they ask a founding family member to stand for the owner of the company so that they can be responsible for any problems that come up. So we have this very strange dual structure of ownership for companies, and because the Korean Korean management prefers having a family member as the effective leader of the company, I think they tend to ignore what's happening with the stockholders. I remember about 2007 or 2008, I was talking with an investor who said that he will never invest in Korea again. And apparently what happened was he invested in a small, medium-sized company in Korea, and when he got concerned about some of the management practices and pointed those out and tried to give some advice on how to run the company, well, the owner just apparently just said, just give me money and keep your mouth shut. And I think that maybe not as bluntly, but I think that may be how a lot of companies look at stockholders. Now, as far as dividends dividends are concerned, well, technically, you can have low dividends and still have a very high stock prices if your company is growing considerably. But right now, most Korean companies are not growing that quickly. And then you can have a lot of cash in the company, but there has to be some reassurance that this cash is going to be used well, prepare for volatility in the future, or reserve cash for investment in the future. But Korea already has a very high level of per capita capital per worker, so there might not be any good cash reasons to use cash. So there might be a lot of practices that goes on in Korea which is not perhaps understandable or acceptable to foreign investors or long-term value investors, whether they be Korean or foreign.
All right, I see. It's quite interesting to hear that Korea has unique corporate, culture of having dual structure of ownership, like our Professor Yang just told us. Now, Professor Kim, some cite geopolitical risks related to North Korea and excessive regulations in the country as other reasons behind this decades-old phenomenon as well. What is your view on this?
Yeah, in addition to what just Professor Yang told, which I think is important, clearly the political risk, the geopolitical risk, is probably the most important source of the Korea discount, I believe. Actually, if you look at the Korean market, whenever the North Korean the missile strikes or some of these kind of things are news actually just revealed, then you can kind of see the stock market and also the futures just dropping very rapidly. And I think this is a perennial problem. And also the investors, especially the foreign investors, relatively are limited in terms of information. So unlike the Korean people living in Korea, it's not going to be as simple as it sounds. And because even with like 5% chance that they may not be able to get their money back if like some war or like war-like situations happen, what should you do, right? That's something that bother, the potential investors and as well as the existing investors. So I think clearly it is one of the big reasons. And then it is above and beyond the default risk, because Korea's default risk is pretty low. So I think that's probably one of the main reasons.
All right. Well, I totally understand their concerns, and I can definitely see this as a chronic issue. Now that we know what the problem is, we need to talk about solutions. And for this, Professor Kim, to enhance South Korea's corporate value, the Yoon administration came up with the Corporate Value Up program. Before we get into the details, could there be any specific reason why the government is trying hard to boost the valuation of stocks at this moment?
So I think, it is understandable because government has to do something. So clearly, if you just remember, the price to book ratio or the market to book ratio, as we just call, is pretty low. So the Japan and some other countries also have tried and just trying, like what would be a good way to boost, the stock price. And clearly, one of the reasons is probably just to increase the growth of firms so that the overall economic growth actually is going to be spurred. And also, I think, the investment should be attracted so that stock market is going to be booming, and that's probably their wish. And also, I think one of the key things is they will just keep looking at the market to book or the return on equity or the ROE ratios to see that if there are certain companies seem to be abnormally lower or they just do not reveal or disclose information properly, and then I think they'll try to nudge the firms so that I think they'll try to just to be a little more transparent and also just upfront in terms of the increasing these type of values. Issue is, of course, these are just recommendations, which is, of course, enough. But how effective is it? Is that going to be an issue? But that's basically the idea.
Right, I see. Well, our Professor Kim already told us that it's just a bunch of recommendations, but I'd like to delve a little bit deeper into it. And for this, Professor Yang, I heard the Corporate Value Up program is a guideline to encourage companies to elevate their value, and the government would offer tax incentives for those companies to come up with measures according to their own plans. Could you tell us more about the program itself?
Yeah, it really doesn't include a lot of concrete measures. The companies are supposed to examine annually their return to equity and other relevant ratios, profitability indicators, corporate governance indicators, and figure out their supposed current status and current value. And then the companies will establish long-term, that is 3 years or more, plans with concrete objectives and timeframes to try to fix some of these problems and raise these performance indicators. And it should include discussions with stockholders, stakeholders, and outside investors. And then they're supposed to publicize the results of these discussions and publicize what their objectives are and how they are doing meeting these objectives at least once every year. The companies which carry out these type of plans, which is mostly just self-evaluation and then publicizing those results and discussions with the stakeholders. If you carry out those type of discussions, if you publicize them, then you will get tax incentives, though I am not quite sure what those tax incentives are going to be, at least so far. And at least according to the some of the more newspaper articles that are coming today, it's not clear how many large companies are really interested because perhaps if they really want to raise the value of their stocks, reduce the Korean discount, they may have to make some changes, especially in corporate governance, that they may not want to make.
All right, so there aren't many concrete measures that are forcing the companies to actually do the job. Now, Professor Kim, we need to take a look at where this originated from. This program reportedly is similar to a Japanese directive that has been encouraging undervalued companies to come up with reform plans. But what made Japan do that in the first place, and did this measure work?
So the answer is kind of yes and no. So as we know, Japan has been struggling with deflation for like 3 decades or 4, depending on how you measure. So they really were desperate to finish this, and they even started purchasing stocks for by the Bank of Japan. So it's like open market purchase for stocks, which is extreme. So even with that, I think it was not as effective as just that they wanted until very recently. And until very recently, they did the same thing, and it was not working well. But then I think as inflation increases, and also finally they were somewhat able to escape from the deflation, I think this policy started working. So it's a bit different, I would say, compared to the South Korean market, because in case of South Korea, we didn't have like the deflation, for instance. And also, I don't think the Bank of Korea was going to, or is going to, just purchase the stocks with their the printed money. So I think it's a bit different.
All right, I see. Well, it is definitely, nice to hear that the government is trying to do something in order to elevate the valuation of Korean companies. But Professor Yang, as you have already mentioned, there aren't many clear and concrete measures. And other market observers as well, they express doubts about the effectiveness of the system as it heavily relies on companies voluntarily taking action. What is your opinion on this?
Okay, well, as I said, companies may not want to make the corporate governance decisions that the investors want to eliminate the Korean discount. If the problem maybe corporate governance problem has to be dealt with, the rights of the owning families have to be curtailed drastically, and then the high corporate debt status of current Korean firms should also be dealt with. But I think one area that we are ignoring is how government policies or government pressure affects the Korea discount. Taking 2 cases, for example, recently, with the Korea Electric Power Company, Korean utility officials refused to raise the electricity prices when the cost of producing electricity went up. So KEPCO had large losses, and KEPCO has a publicly traded stock. So government control over prices, whether it be formal like KEPCO or informal like, say, Ramyeon, may have a lot to do with companies' profitability and, in turn, the Korean discount. And then this is, I think, problem with the Korean corporate governance structure as well as government policies, but we tend to look at not a single company, but a group of companies that the owning family owns. So if one company gets into a problem, then another company that is owned by the same owner is expected to help the company out. But if you try that in, say, the United States or Europe, you're going to have a hard time, or maybe even it'll be legally impossible for something like that to happen, because these are legally 2 different companies, and the owner's company is using money from one company to help what's legally a independent, separate company. So government control over prices, over how management works, it'll have to be, I think, curtailed substantially as well. And again, I'm not sure if that's going to happen.
All right, I see. Well, based on what our Professor Yang told us, Professor Kim, what more should be done for South Korean companies to boost their corporate value?
I think they have to increase the more like, the kind of the engine of growth for each company to increase the profitability, and also try to do the risk management. So if you look at like Korean market from like 1996, for instance, I think it's a long period, but therefore I think you can see the whole picture. From the 1996 to 2024, for instance, I think the Korean stock market has been earning about 8.4% every year. U.S. market has been earning the same period about like the 9%, so slightly lower, but it's not like major big difference. But if you actually look at from like 2015 or 16, then the Korean market has been earning about like 5% or 5.3%, while the U.S. has been earning like 16.8, 17%. So I think that's kind of where start actually quite different. So like around like 2016 or 17, something has changed. I think it could be government policy, it could be regime, it could be tax, or it could be engine of growth. I think we have to start just looking at the reasons what actually were quite different between the 2-3 countries, why and this big developing the engine has been cooled down. I think that's something that we need to find to boost up the corporate value of Korea.
All right, I see. Well, Professor Kim, thank you for your advice. Now, I'd like to ask many more questions to our experts, but unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Professor Yang and Professor Kim, for your time and insights today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. Unfortunately, today is my last Within the Frame. It has been a great privilege to present this in-depth analysis program, to learn and to meet a wide array of experts. From next week, our very own Han Daeun will be in charge. Thank you and have a lovely weekend. Goodbye.
What can I say?